back, everybody, to We Are TPM with myself, Kyle Teixeira. Sitting next to me is John Teixeira. Glad to be back this week.
Did you have to think about your name there?
No,
or
I was just trying
were you
to
just trying to be deliberate?
Thing.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
So if you guys are interested in why I just did that or anything else we have to talk about on this podcast, give us a call, 817-818-9039. Shoot us an email at showmethemoney weartpm.com. Let's get into what we are talking about this week, which is not subject 1, subject 3, or subject 4. We are talking about subject 2, creative financing, and that is a 2 with a T-O-O.
No, just
one 2.
Just one
2 O.
Just one O.
But not T-W-O.
No, not
So,
T-W-O.
Subject 2. And that's all I'm going to say about that subject. Just kidding. What are we talking about?
You know what? I think one of the reasons why we want to talk about this today is because we have an economic oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? We kind of have a groundwork, a market for it right now, for it to start coming up and people start using it again. And because of that, people are starting to talk about it on social media. And I'm seeing some things that are interesting and some that maybe are a little bit misleading about it. And I feel like I have a lot of experience using subject twos in the past when it was beneficial,
a market like this,
when it was a market that was beneficial for it.
And this is part of our talking about creative financing. So this one is very creative, I would say, because there's a lot of points and factors and interests to a subject to deal. Mm-hmm. But the market we're talking about that these things become more prevalent is, and this will make sense as we get into it, is high interest rates, inflated values, inflation, all this stuff that we're dealing with right now is when these things come into play. Because when you recently had, this is an even bigger one, you recently had low interest rates or a high number of homes that were purchased or are out there that were previously purchased at low interest rates, mm-hmm. and now you're in a high interest rate environment. This is probably the most prevalent combination of that environment because we got there so quickly. We went from so low to higher interest rates so quickly.
So you're making great points, but I feel like we need to define what we're talking about. So let's take a step back and define what we're talking about. Subject to, as it's referred to, financing, is specifically refers to the term subject to the existing financing. That's what they mean when you say subject to. So what you're doing is you basically are using the existing financing that's in place from the previous owner, right? You're using their financing and continuing it. And sometimes / usually that also includes some kind of cash infusion. Maybe you're catching up a mortgage that's behind. Maybe you're paying some taxes. Maybe you're doing some of both of that. There's something else involved in that other than just assuming. You're not really assuming other than using that existing financing. And I think it's important that we explain what the difference is between a subject to and assumption because they're very different. Assumptions also are coming back. Probably something else we need to talk about.
Yeah, and they're very similar, but extremely different.
Yes.
Extremely different risk, extremely different the way they operate. So you want to use an example first? Should we go that route?
Yeah.
So we're purchasing a house. This is creative financing, right? So normally I purchase a house, I have seller and I have buyer. John's going to be buyer. I'm going to be seller.
All right.
There we go.
All right.
So
I like it.
We want to sell this house for $100,000. Let's be more realistic. Let's sell houses for $500,000, right? We can't use the $100,000 example anymore.
Well, let's do this. Let's use the most common scenario that a subject to is done. Let's say you, the seller, are behind on your mortgage.
Yep, let's go back to $100,000. Why not? Right, it's easy.
Sure, you bought it.
I got a $100,000 house, right? Or I want to sell it to you for $200,000.
Okay.
My mortgage on it was $100,000. That's where we were getting at.
Okay.
My mortgage remaining is $100,000. I bought this house, let's say 5 years ago, at an interest rate of let's go 3 years ago, an interest rate of 3.25%.
Okay, I love it.
So Mr. Seller over here has a mortgage at 3.25% based on 100,000, and you want to buy it for 200,000.
All right.
But I'm behind on my mortgage, right? So if I don't pay my mortgage, bank's going to take it from me, and they're going to sell it for whatever they want to sell it for. So.
Right. So me as the buyer, I may not be as inclined to give you your $100,000, right? Because I'm basically saving you, right? Like, so what? While I may want to give you something to entice you to work with me, I don't necessarily. And this is I'm pointing this out because this is one of the reasons why people do this. I don't necessarily need to give you the 100,000 that you think you deserve, because if I don't do anything or nobody comes in and helps you out of this quote unquote mess that you're in, then you lose a house to foreclosure and you get nothing. So my sales pitch to you as the buyer is, instead of you getting nothing, why don't I give you something? Why don't I pay your payments up so your credit doesn't continue to suffer, right? Put, I don't know, $25,000 in your pocket so you can walk away and have some moving expenses and have some profit. How's that sound? Instead of foreclosure, walking away with nothing, and getting thrown out of your house. Now, everyone's in a different situation, so I just painted a picture of somebody who maybe doesn't have any other options. Sometimes you, as the seller, you do have other options, and maybe the offer I just made to you may not work. So it's a negotiation, and every situation is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out, since you bring it up in that manner, that this is commonly where I'd say sellers in bad situations get taken advantage of in situations in deals like this. This is one of those tools that can be used to take advantage of people. So keep that in mind. Like in the scenario you just mentioned, I've seen where they promise to lease it. You know, it all sounds great. And now you get to lease your own property for 5 years or whatever. But you know, you're a day late on your payment, now they're kicking you out, stuff like that.
Yeah, you are absolutely right, 100%. And while we talk about all this, this is creative, and you do have to be careful about people out there. They're snakes, right? That does not mean that if somebody comes in and makes an offer like the one I just made you, that they're necessarily a snake or taking advantage. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think that's what you're saying either. There are just other ways that people take advantage of people.
I just wanted to bring that up since someone comes to you with a subject too. Don't just think it's a great deal, right? We're going to get into.
You got to be careful.
You got to get into why, because
that's why we're going to talk about it. We're going to get into the details here today, so that people understand. So that instead of what I'm seeing on social media right now is kind of that overview picture to make it all sound great. This is how you should buy, right? Well,
it's hard to. I mean, it's hard to get these deals done because. One thing we're leaving out here is it is usually only in the seller's interest to do these deals when they have a need, like you just described, right? When it is they are running out of options and they don't want to lose. Because in that example, I have $100,000 in equity that I don't want to lose, right? If they foreclose on me, I don't just lose all the money I've put into that $100,000 principal. I also lose the $100,000 in equity that I could get out there on the market if I was going to go sell it. And sometimes you don't have the time for that. Maybe you're about to be foreclosed on. So this buyer can come in, pay all that back, and subject to your mortgage. And basically what that means is they're going to take it over on a back-end agreement with you. It's not an agreement with the lender. It's you're signing something that gives me subject to rights. Your mortgage is subject to me. That's why it's subject to me. You know. So, well, it's subject to the existing financing. But yes, you're right. So here's what happens. Let's walk through the pieces of it, and then we'll talk more. We'll get more into the concepts of how, why, and the risks, because there's risks on both sides. So basically, when I've done these in the past, I've actually gone to a title company. I do them just like any other real estate transaction. Go to the title company, you do title work, you clear the title work. The title company knows that you're transferring subject to the existing financing. They're getting a payoff amount and everything, so that we know at the time of closing where are we right there at the time of closing, right? Like, what is our benchmark? And so
they close it, and there's a lot of disclosures with the subject to, because to make sure everybody knows exactly what they're doing. And you close it now, and now you're on the hook for, well, actually, okay. So legally or credit wise, that buyer really isn't on the hook for anything now. Legally you are, but that loan is still in the name of that seller, right? So if you foreclose, if you don't pay it on time, you can start getting lates. Those lates go to or hit the credit of the seller, right? So it's really important when you put these things together that you're putting them together with the right parties, and that there's an agreement that handles all that addresses all that beforehand.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not trust necessarily, but there is, I guess, mutual destruction.
Mutual destruction.
There's a mutual
is that what you said?
destruction part of this, right?
Wow, that's
it's the
good
best way to
term. I
put
like
it.
that.
I mean, it's not that you trust the other person. You're basically agreeing to, a
mutually destruct each other.
Well, yeah. If one party doesn't uphold the other, I mean, it screws both of them, right? So, and to describe that is because you are selling this property, right? So, seller does sell it to buyer. Buyer has a deed. However, buyer has no liens in their name, no mortgage in their name. So, it's still the seller's mortgage, and in 99.9% of cases, that note has a due on sale clause that scares everybody off, because due on sale means when this transfer happens, now the entire loan's due. Well, bank/mortgagee doesn't really care about that due on sale clause as long as the mortgage payments are made up, right? It's not how the contracts are legally written. It's just kind of generally understood that way.
Well, no, that's and I've characterized it that way. But one thing to clarify is what it says. What the due on sale clause says is that the bank can ask you to pay within 30 days if it has transferred to another party.
It doesn't say
it doesn't say that they will. It says that they can. And I've never seen a bank do it. They really don't care. To your point, they don't really care as long as the payment's made, right? At that point. I'm sure they care, but I mean, they don't have if it's a small private lender, then the small private lender may care a lot more than Bank of America is going to care, right? So just make your payment. Everything's fine with it. And it can be done all upfront, on board, legally, with tons of disclosures. And here's the thing with these things. What? Go ahead.
I was describing the structure, though.
Okay, go for it.
You got that's the risk for the seller. But also, if the buyer doesn't pay that mortgage, seller's only way of making that right is to foreclose now on the subject to buyer. And in that scenario, if they're not paying the mortgage, they're also being foreclosed on by the bank. So that's a time game, right? Who gets foreclosed on faster, and then getting your property back from who? There's pieces of it that can be messy if it's not done right. So.
Yeah, I would say if you're even considering doing this, and we could talk a little bit more about when you might do it, but if you're considering doing it, get people involved that have done it before, that know what they're doing. This is a really dangerous game to play if you don't know what you're doing. If you listen to these guys on social media, they make it sound so easy. And it can be easy if you know what you're doing. But get a real estate attorney involved, get a servicing company involved, whoever needs to get involved, get them involved, because this can be extremely messy. And if you're a licensed agent, this can ruin your career if you do it wrong. Like this could literally get you violations with whatever, commission that is over your license, and end your career. You lose your license.
Well, and all these scare points is not what we're meaning to say. I guess we kind of skipped over the biggest why, and not just why people do it, but why it is a product that is becoming, or a tool in creative financing that is becoming more prevalent in this market is because of interest rates. Because it is extremely likely that anyone that owns any property right now has either purchased or refinanced during the low interest rate environment we were in 2020 and 2021. So the likelihood of you having a 4% or lower interest rate right now is very high on your current note. So what we didn't bring up is that's why you're not assuming you're taking over the payments at this low interest mortgage, and it can make a huge difference when rates are 6.7% like they are right now. So that's why you as buyer want to take this over, because if you're an investor looking at cash flow and appreciation or whatever you're looking at, especially cash flow, if you could take over my $1,400 a month payment versus your exact same payment at a higher interest rate, or your exact same principal amount at interest rate of 6.7, that may be like $2,200 a month, it makes that a big difference to the buyer on what they're going to spend. So it's a way of, now you're taking the property, but also taking the good mortgage that you can't go get now. You can't go get, especially federally backed. In a lot of cases, you're not just taking over a private money note, you're taking over a backed mortgage, which you just can't do right now. So that's one way to do it.
Well, and to your point, if interest rate is the main motivator for doing this, which you're right, it probably will be, right? Then it could be just a temporary tool, right? And it should be. It's not something you want to do long term. So let's say you're going to do subject to, and then you could refinance. Like, let's take our scenario. Let's go back to our scenario. I bought that house from you. Let's just say you weren't in arrears and you weren't, like, it wasn't a problem. Didn't have a need. Here's the other reason too. You didn't have a need because you were behind, but let's say you had a need because you wanted your $200,000, and there's 8 other homes in your market that are just exactly like yours, and they're starting to sell for sub $200,000, but you still want your $200,000. Well, as a buyer, I might be able to be willing to pay you your $200,000, pay a little bit more for the home because I'm getting quote unquote terms. I'm getting subject to terms, which is more attractive to me as a buyer. So I might take over your $100,000 with your great note, right? And then give you $100,000 cash, right? So that is also a scenario. But I would want to, if I want to take that cash out, I would want to refinance down the road. So let's say interest rates come back down to 5. What did you say? You're at 4.3 or something like that. So interest rates come back down to 5. I want to pull my cash, my $200,000 out, or actually it would be $150,000. I would be able to pull out so I could get at least some of my cash out. I can refinance that and get rid of that note that is now in your name.
Yes, and at that time, owner. once that note's paid off, that now as the seller to the subject to deal initially, I'm free and clear now. My risk is now gone. Your risk, right. The other risk we talk about is gone. That note existing was your risk. Once it's paid off, there's nothing to tie you to the property anymore, really.
And you can make that part of the deal when you negotiate. You can make a timeline on when that refinance happens, part of your negotiation for a subject to deal if you're a seller.
Yeah, and I'm going to circle back to the due on sale clause because it's so commonly brought up, especially by investors that are so, worried about or bring that point up and be worried about it. I always find this one point funny. Because I always ask this question is, anytime I've talked about subject to, or even, really just the subject to part is they're like, well, what about the due on sale clause? And I'm like, okay, well, tell me about your other properties. And I manage them. We manage them, right? And I know that after you purchased it under your personal name, you signed it over to your LLC. It is the exact same thing. Your due on sale clause applies in that situation.
And people do it all the time. Nobody worries about it.
These same people I talk to do it without worrying about it. Well, they're like, well, it's my LLC. I'm like, well, it's a different name. You changed the title.
It's literally a different entity.
Yeah, it's literally a different title. It's just like the subject to. You're essentially, when you sign over that your LLC, your rental property over to the LLC after the note's made in your personal name, you're doing a subject to deal to yourself, essentially. It's lower risk because, of course, you're the controlling person of that entity, and there's no actual contract, but the concept is the same. That is what you're doing.
And to your point, how would the bank know any different if the transfer happens and it goes from Kyle Teixeira to Do Better Investments LLC? The bank is going to assume that you've just moved it into your LLC,
exactly,
like most people do.
Exactly, and most people buying these subject to deals are investment companies or are LLCs or buying it under an LLC, and now it's like, okay, well, you're Joe Blow is fine signing over his property to Cool Bean Property Investments every time he buys a rental property.
We're coming up with some good names. I like it.
But who knows? The buyer could be Slow Bean Property Investments, and the bank's not going to be like, oh, well, that one's owned by this guy. No, they don't. One, they don't know, and two, I mean, that's usually a point of numbing that concern, just because they're like, oh crap, I've already done this 9 times. Okay, yeah, then one more is probably not that risky, right? Or whatever. Right. It's more of just how common that is. It's a statement of how common that due on sale is. So.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is downplay the due on sale clauses because it's the one point that people use to say, oh, yeah, but I know that there's a due on sale clause in every mortgage. It's there to protect the mortgage company. It should be there. The mortgage company should have that right. They didn't make a loan with you or anybody else. So if they choose to no longer service that loan with a new owner, they shouldn't have to. Well, but to your point, it's no different than when you put it in your LLC. It's absolutely no different, and they really don't care.
And it's part of the risk, and it should be part of the terms, right? So say
it should be disclosed.
In that scenario, say mortgage company does come back and call the due on sale clause, right? Well, now that's refer to your terms. Okay, so the buyer took this risk knowing about the due on sale clause and knowing how this all works, right? And there could be a term that says if the mortgage company calls the mortgage at no fault of the seller via the due on sale or whatever it may be, now the buyer has to go get their own mortgage and pay it off, right? So they lose that interest rate. They, essentially the deal ends.
Well, here's the other part of that.
Assuming they do that.
If they force the due on sale clause, it takes months for them to do that. So the due on sale clause says 30 days, but if you don't do it in 30 days and they have to legally force you to do it, that process takes months, depending on what state you're in. Here in Texas, I don't think it would take quite as long, but I know if you're in California, I've heard that it takes up to 2.5 years to get a due on sale clause enforced. So every state's going to be a little bit different, but and you need to understand the state you're doing it in.
It will take more time than it will take to close a refinance. That's essentially exactly what you're saying. Is it will take more time.
And here's the thing: when you refinance your home, we've all done it, right? Do you have to put more money down?
Generally, no.
Right. So it's easy. It's easy from the standpoint of I'm not infusing more capital into the deal. I already own the deal. I'm using your financing. Whether I gave you $100,000 or I just paid your payments up or whatever I did doesn't matter at this point. Now that's done, and I now own the home. I can refinance just like I normally refinance, whether it's in my name, your name, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, it sounds like that due on sale clause is more of a risk for the seller, right? But it's not. It's equal kind of, but it's to the buyer, it's a risk of making the good deal not as good, because now if that happens after 6 months and they have to refinance into high interest, that affects their whole the whole cap rate they determined. So
I think it's just something that needs to be disclosed personally.
Yeah.
And that's it. I don't think it's much of a risk to anybody. And so what we're trying to do is kind of diffuse the risk a little bit by explaining what would happen in worst case scenario. And I've never heard of any of those worst case scenarios actually.
Yeah, it's
happening.
More of the main real things that happen is you're locked in a little bit to the financing, right? You don't have as much freedom to change the type of financing that you have, or except for doing a full refinance, you're kind of locked into that financing. You picked that financing, so that term, that rate, but that's usually why you do it. So it can be good, but it can be bad, but it's.
So we should do a podcast on assumptions so that we can talk about the difference. I guess the main difference is with assumptions is it's a whole new loan that you qualify for and everything, right? So you assume a loan. Well, I'm sorry. You assume the same loan, but you qualify for it and everything. You go through that entire process and then change the names, and you essentially now have a new loan that you've assumed from the seller. Completely different. This is just using the existing financing the way it is. You're probably not even telling the bank you did it. You're just making an address change to the bank so that they know where to email statements or where to mail statements, now. And
well, we'll talk about we'll do one on assumptions because it is worth talking about.
Yep, I think so.
Because this one, I think it's worth also mentioning the dark end. We set this up as the good end of this tool, right? That's how it should be used. It can create a really good deal for the seller and the buyer and put money in one's pocket, make it cheaper for the other, right? You're basically a way of taking old interest rate environments and making them a reality today. But the bad end of it is where people get taken advantage of, right? And I think it's worth mentioning because this is what isn't talked about out there, and this is what happens. So say you have a $500,000, your mom, or your mom has a house that's now worth $500,000 that she bought 30, 40 years ago, right? Maybe she has a mortgage on it and they owe $23,000. Let's use that number. They owe $23,000 on a $500,000 house, and they're behind on that mortgage for the $23,000. Well, some company or some investor or whatever could try to swoop in and say, "Hey, I'll take over your mortgage payments and catch you up if you do this subject to." And now they just bought a house that's worth $500,000 for $23,000, essentially. So, and that's where this can get ugly because there's no enforcement of that, right? This is a back end deal.
If the person doesn't understand what they just did and they were misled, yes, absolutely.
And that is what I've seen happen. I've heard this exact story happen. So that's where need to stay away from it. So,
in every case that I've ever been involved in a subject to deal, both parties knew everything. They knew exactly what they were doing. They understood the terms. They understood what the repercussions or what their benefits were at the end of the deal, and they understood the timelines. And that's really important. If you're going to do one of these, you cannot disclose terms enough, and you cannot do too much to make sure everybody understands exactly what they're doing. Because if you do that and everyone still agrees and says, "Okay, this is a good deal for me, let's go," your hands are washed of anybody accusing you of doing that, because this is going to be a win-win for both people. Otherwise, it shouldn't be done, right? So this buyer is going to get a good deal of some sort. He's either going to get great terms or a good deal on sales price, or both, right? There's nothing wrong with putting together a good deal for a buyer, right? If I'm a buyer or if I'm an agent of a buyer, that's what we should be doing. And as a seller, I'm getting out of a house maybe that I don't have any other way of getting out of, or I'm getting more for it than I would normally get for it, and I'm being able to walk away with some assets, and I'm doing it in a way that is allowing me to not have to fix up the home and market the home and show the home. And so there's all kinds of benefits to me as a seller also. Then there's nothing wrong with that either. The only thing that's wrong with it in the scenario you described is if everyone isn't fully disclosed on all the terms, period.
Yep. And I also think it's worth noting something you said earlier about the alternative is getting nothing. A lot of people don't realize that it's not always true. Before I describe this, there are always better routes, that you should always go a better route than this. But in my example of the $500,000 and owning $23,000 on it, if the bank took that home from the seller and they sold it out on an auction or a courthouse steps. Remind you, this house is worth $500,000. This is going to bid up. The mortgage or the auctioneer or whatever, they should start it wherever they want to start it. But say this thing sells for $200,000, $300,000. That's a great deal for whoever bought it, right? It will bid out that way. The bank was only owed $23,000, even though they took it from you. Say this house sold for $223,000. That overage of $200,000 is yours. Most people don't know that. It goes unclaimed all the time. In the state of Texas, the state can't claim it. That overage is yours. So there is literally entire business models about reaching out to people to let them know about these overages and how to claim them and all that stuff. So it's just worth noting that it's not always nothing, If you got your house taken from you and didn't know anything on it, and that's common in tax sales, right? That's very common in tax sales. They'll take your house for not paying taxes. Well, you only owed $20,000 in taxes, right? And they sold your house for $200,000. So, that money's yours.
For a period of time. I think there's a recapture period of like 7 years or something like that. But yeah. So, I get it. I understand what you're saying. But I was making a sales pitch to you on why a buyer how a buyer would pitch this to a seller, right? Like, because in essence, you're going to walk away with nothing.
Yeah.
It's possible that I had trouble with that word right there, huh? It's possible that what you said is going to happen and there's going to be an overage and they could get some. That is a possibility, but it's an unlikely and not guaranteed possibility. So
and there is better. That's why I've started it with there is better solutions than what I just described. Because if there was an overage available, there was ways you could have gotten more or gotten it without your house having to be taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
So talk to an expert, people who know creative financing, creative ways of doing anything. We're out of the market right now for this, but this can tie back around eventually to short sales, right? Short sales involve ways to avoid that too.
I gotta say, if you're thinking about doing this, here I just want to say, I just kind of want to get on a little bit of a soapbox a little bit, okay, Kyle? Because there are people out there. There's two. So you don't know what a soapbox is?
No.
There are two worlds out there. There is a licensed real estate agent world that knows how to do traditional real estate sales. There's an investment world out there that does real estate sales almost exactly like real estate agents do them, but they're not licensed. And they're not licensed for a reason. They have contempt for the way the real estate agents do things. They don't want to be regulated by somebody else. They want to do whatever they want to do and sometimes take advantage of people. So you need to be careful of both. If you're thinking about doing something creative like this, what I would implore you is to find a real estate agent that understands creative financing and understands the investment world. They're out there. That's the person you want helping you through this. The traditional real estate agent is not going to be helpful. They're going to hurt you and they're not going to be helpful. The investor that has no tie to being licensed whatsoever also is going to only be looking after themselves and not be helpful to you either.
Well, not just I'd say experienced too.
Experienced, absolutely.
Knowledgeable about this stuff is great, but people's real estate agents can be taken advantage of just as easily. So I've talked to
if I said subject to right now to a room of 100 real estate agents, I might find maybe a handful that would know what I was even talking about.
Here's a point to that. We were at a conference and someone did it was a presentation or something, but subject to. They put it in their presentation, subject to, right? Not because they knew anything about it, just because they knew it was up and coming or whatever. And it said everything, right? Subject to the number. And that's a simple point. That to us, that's like,
you think they were just being clever?
No, I think they legitimately
just didn't
knew
understand what
and
the
had
two
heard
was?
about subject to and wanted to start a conversation about it, which
About
is what they
subject
said.
to.
But it's so wrong
But
to
they didn't
put the
understand.
number subject to, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, no,
Right.
it is subject to somebody. It matters because it is the whole premise of the entire tool. And if you call it subject to, it's like, all right, well, I wonder what subject 3 financing is. Subject 4. How creative can we get with this? So,
that's
so you're
funny.
right. It's very uncommon. People know about it. I have met investors that have done it that don't know what it is.
And investors don't typically, they're in the investment world because they don't like real estate agents, or they don't want to work with real estate agents, or they don't know how to work with real estate agents. So those two worlds, they collide, and they don't work cohesively very often. And it's ironic because they're both doing exactly the same thing. And a lot of times these investors are helping people and doing good things, right? And so the real estate agent, I'm talking to the real estate agent out there that understands this or has any interest in this. You should start going to some investment clubs and start learning about these creative financing ways that you can do things so that you can help your clients even better, right?
Yeah, because there is ways that are extremely helpful, and that's what's in this environment again today. Is say in 2022, at the peak of everything, like there was people who bought houses at the peak of prices. So, like say at 0% down or whatever. So they have this $250,000 house that they owe $250,000 on, right? They're about to lose it and get foreclosed on. Well, there's no money for them in that house. It's a net loss, right? Or whatever, even if it's a break even. What's not a break even is the foreclosure on your record and the bank taking a house from you, right? That destroys your credit, all these negatives, where some investor could come in and say, hey, well, to me, that interest rate you have on that note's valuable, subject to it to me, walk away, and it's a good deal for both parties.
Which is why between 2008 and 2011, this was a prevalent thing that people were doing for exactly that reason. Mm-hmm. And we may get there again for different reasons. We may have the environment is in place, like you said, because of interest rates is creating that environment. We may have another inflationary run. You never know what's going to happen. And
but the scenario I just described is a very good reason to do it. It actually helps people out. It doesn't just save the foreclosure. Right. It catches up that credit line. So you walk away with no debt. You're paid up. It should help your credit, and whatever. It was a failed deal for you, of course, but it was saved in the end by this buyer versus the alternative of, you get the house taken, foreclosed on your house, your credit gets destroyed, they sell it under market, and now you owe them the difference. It sounds a lot worse than walking away with nothing, So
Yep.
You don't want to owe the bank $40,000, have no house, and have destroyed credit.
And I hope, to your point, Kyle, I have not sounded like I'm not a proponent of subject to, because I am. I've just seen it used as a tool to take advantage of people.
No, I know, and that's why we both bring it up.
And so it's a tool. It's out there. It should be used. I just hate seeing these people on social media talking about it like it's extremely easy, like it's something that just everybody should just be doing, and you should go out and buy 10 houses tomorrow subject to. I mean, this is something that it takes a while to put these deals together, to negotiate them. You don't just go out and find them. They kind of come to you because you got your eyes wide open. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and or you go out or you go seek them out. That's what these people are advising on social media is you got to go find people who need this, right? Well, just go.
You know what happens when you get a foreclosure, the foreclosure process starts and the notice of default goes out and you end up on that foreclosure list. Mm-hmm. You know what happens after that?
You get blown up.
You get blown up in every possible way that you can get blown up. You get called, you get emailed, you get mail. Your mailbox becomes full of investors wanting to help you.
Yeah, we're just talking about one point.
Which one
of
do I
creative
use?
Financing, right? We just spent this whole time talking about subject to another investor be coming from another avenue of.
You know what happens? You know what happens? I know you. Okay, so let's say you're my friend. And we got that scenario that we just talked about, okay? and you're behind on your payment and you're in the middle of foreclosure. You know why you and I are talking about this subject to right now? Is because I have a relationship with you and you've worked with me in the past. But your mailbox is still full, isn't it? It's full of those investors that all want to help.
Yep.
So why didn't you call them? Why are we talking about it? Why didn't you call one of the 100 people that have sent you a mail that want to do the same thing that I want to do?
Well, because I trust you, right?
Because you trust me, because you know me, because you don't know what to think or why all these people are now. You assume that they're all trying to take advantage of you because all of a sudden your mailbox is full of people wanting to HELP.
Yep. And I still haven't extended my car's extended warranty. That's the other reason too.
So does that solve all these problems if you do that?
I don't know. I've never tried.
You've never tried?
Because those people are so blatantly trying to take advantage of you. It's less blatant in foreclosure process. So,
but my point is that it's as a human being, when you're in this situation, you are now overwhelmed. This is what I meant by that. Keep your eyes wide open. Make sure people know you're out there, you're willing and able to help in these situations. But just counting on the foreclosure list and sending a letter out with everyone else, waste of time, waste of money. So I try to tell people all the time, foreclosure list is an absolute waste of money. Where it's not a waste of money is knowing what's on the foreclosure list so that when you get an opportunity and I bump into you at Starbucks or something, or like, hey, how's it going? And I know that you're on the foreclosure list and I know you, right? Now it's effective. Now I can start a conversation with you. Mm-hmm. Or you'll take my call because I know you. But just being another random person calling on the foreclosure list, I don't know, it might work for some every once in a while, but it's pretty hit and miss.
Unfortunately, I see that it works for people, and it's usually not good for the person that answers that call. So, that's subject to subject to you, subject to you.
Subject to existing financing is what that term is referring to, and I hope that this has been helpful. We do need to do one on assumptions. Maybe we could get Trevor involved in that, huh?
Yeah.
So get Trevor in here and talk about what's happening in the mortgage world today, and we talk about assumptions. How's that sound?
Yep. And due on sale clauses and all that, right? No, I'm just kidding. Don't talk to lenders about due on sale clauses.
No, don't even mention it.
And that's the other one. What if your mortgage gets sold? Does that change the terms of your mortgage?
No.
Easy. No.
All
right. Well, you guys want to hear anything about subject to? Do it. Find somebody. Need help. Or really any of it. 817-818-9039. That'll get you to TPM's main line. Or shoot us an email at showmethemoney@wearetpm.com. Thank y'all for tuning in. And subject to out.
Later.